Have you ever wondered what secrets your family has buried? The things left unspoken, hidden in attics, basements, and locked drawers? I never did, until 3 weeks ago. I trusted my grandfather completely. Dr. William Hayes, the beloved physician who delivered 3 generations in our small town of Millbrook, the man who taught me to fish, who bandaged my scraped knees, who inspired me to pursue medicine myself. But now I know the truth. Welcome to the OBSCURALORE Vault. Today's account: my grandfather was the town's respected doctor. His secret journals document treating patients who returned from the Necromancer's moon ritual. The box came to me after Grandma passed. A simple cardboard container among dozens just like it, filled with old photographs, trinkets, and papers deemed too important to discard, but not important enough to display. I almost threw it away without opening it. Just another box of medical journals from his 50 years of practice, I thought. I should have thrown it away. The journals were bound in black leather, 7 of them, dated from 1968 to 1983. Nothing remarkable about their appearance, nothing to suggest what horrors they contained. But something made me pause, a small symbol embossed on the spine of each, a crescent moon with what looked like a human figure suspended within its curve. I opened the first journal that night. June 17, 1968, first patient following the Necromancer's moon. That was all the opening entry said. No explanation, no context. Just those 8 words in my grandfather's precise handwriting. The next entry was more detailed. June 18, 1968, Samuel Thorne, age 42. Returned from ritual during last night's lunar eclipse. Physical examination reveals normal vitals but markedly reduced body temperature, 95.2 degrees. Patient complains of memories that aren't mine and voices under the skin. Prescribed bed rest and sedatives. Blood samples taken for analysis. I remember Samuel Thorne. Not well, he died when I was still young. But I remember him as the old man who lived at the edge of town, the one mothers warned their children to avoid. Stay away from old man Thorne's place, they'd say. He's not right in the head. I had no idea my grandfather had treated him, or what returned from ritual meant. I read on. The entries grew more detailed, more disturbing. June 22, 1968. Samuel's condition deteriorating rapidly. Blood work shows anomalies, cellular structures I can't identify. They appear to be changing, reconstructing themselves. Patient now exhibits severe photosensitivity and refuses to eat normal food. Found him attempting to consume raw meat from his refrigerator. When questioned, he stated, "The hunger is different now." I slammed the journal shut. This couldn't be real. My grandfather was a respected physician, a man of science. This read like the ravings of a madman or the plot of a cheap horror novel. But the handwriting was unmistakably his, and there were 6 more journals. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Instead, I read journal after journal, entry after entry. A record of patients, my neighbors, people I had grown up with, all of whom had participated in something called the Necromancer's moon ritual. All of whom had come back, different. From what I could piece together, every lunar eclipse, a small group would venture into the old cave system beneath Miller's Ridge. They called it crossing over. Most never returned, but those who did, they became my grandfather's patients. September 15, 1969. Meeting with Thomas Miller regarding the ritual. He insists it continues despite my warnings. 3 more disappeared during last night's eclipse, but Margaret Wilkins returned. She is the 7th. Her skin has the same grayish pallor as the others. Her speech is normal but delayed, as if she's translating her thoughts from another language. When asked what she saw beyond the threshold, She smiled and said, "The Moon Prince knows your name now, William." What was happening in my quiet hometown? What terrible secret had my grandfather been keeping all these years? I needed to understand more. The journals referenced physiological transformations, but were frustratingly vague about specifics. My grandfather documented symptoms: unusual pupil dilation, skin discoloration, lowered body temperature, aversion to certain frequencies of light, but seemed hesitant to draw conclusions. Or perhaps he was afraid to put those conclusions into writing. One name appeared with increasing frequency throughout the journals: Thomas Miller, the town's founder's great-grandson, and, according to my grandfather, the keeper of the ritual. My grandfather seemed to both fear and respect this man. April the 3rd, 1970. Thomas showed me the book today, ancient, bound in something I dare not identify. The text is written in no language I recognize, yet somehow I could comprehend passages when he read them aloud. He says the Necromancer's moon is not just an astronomical event, but a thinning of boundaries between our world and somewhere else, a place where the laws of nature as we understand them do not apply. I knew Thomas Miller had died in 1982, a hunting accident supposedly, but his son still lived in the old Miller property on the hill overlooking town. Maybe he knew something. But first I needed to finish the journals. May 24th, 1971. Samuel Thorne's condition has progressed beyond my ability to manage medically. His skeletal structure is showing signs of reconfiguration. X-rays reveal additional growth along the vertebrae. He no longer speaks in coherent sentences, instead repeating phrases like, "It grows within," and "the lunar blessing transforms." I've moved him to the basement facility, where I can monitor him away from curious eyes. Basement facility. The house I'd spent countless holidays in as a child had a basement, yes, but it was just a normal cellar with preserves and old furniture, or so I'd thought. August 19th, 1971. Samuel passed today. Or perhaps passed is the wrong word. His physical form finally surrendered to the changes. What emerged is no longer Samuel Thorne, no longer human. I've contained it as best I can, but Thomas insists we must return it to the caves during the next eclipse. He says it's going home. I put down the journal, my hands shaking. What had my grandfather been involved in? What had happened to Samuel Thorne? And most disturbing of all, had they really taken whatever he became back to those caves? I began searching for information about lunar eclipses in our area during those years. It didn't take long to find confirmation. Every patient my grandfather documented had returned during a verifiable eclipse. The astronomical facts aligned perfectly with the journal entries. This wasn't fiction. This wasn't the imagination of an old doctor losing his grip on reality. Something had happened in those caves. Something was still happening. The next morning, I drove to my grandmother's house, my grandfather's house. It had stood empty since her passing, waiting to be sold. I still had the keys. The basement looked exactly as I remembered it. Concrete floor, metal shelves lined with dusty mason jars, an old workbench in the corner. Nothing unusual. Nothing secret, but the journals had been real. The basement facility had to be real too. I spent hours tapping walls, measuring dimensions, comparing the basement's layout to the floors above. And then I found it, a discrepancy. The basement seemed shorter than it should be by about 15 feet. There was a hidden room. Behind the old metal shelving unit, nearly invisible in the dim light, was the outline of a door. No handle, no hinges visible from this side. Just a seam in the concrete and a small indentation about chest height. The indentation was shaped like a crescent moon. I pressed my hand against it, not expecting anything to happen. But the moment my skin touched the shallow carving, I felt it give slightly, then heard a mechanism click within the wall. The hidden door swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow corridor that extended into darkness. The air that rushed out was cold and smelled of chemicals and something else, something organic and wrong. I should have called someone, the police, a friend, anyone, but I didn't. I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped through the doorway. The corridor was short, ending in another door. This one made of heavy metal with a small viewing window, a hospital door, or a laboratory door, or a cell door. It wasn't locked. The room beyond was larger than I expected. Clinical. White-tiled walls now yellowed with age, metal examination tables, cabinets with glass fronts displaying medical instruments, and along the far wall, 5 large cylindrical tanks filled with cloudy liquid. I approached the nearest tank, my flashlight beam cutting through years of dust on the glass. Inside, suspended in yellowish fluid, was something. Something that might once have been human. The proportions were wrong, limbs too long, joints bent at impossible angles. The head was elongated, the features distorted beyond recognition. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. This couldn't be real. But as my light swept across the other tanks, I saw they each contained similarly warped forms, specimens. My grandfather's patients, people who had returned from the ritual. On a desk nearby lay a final journal, newer than the others, its black leather cover unmarked by age. I picked it up with trembling hands and opened to the first page. October 2nd, 1983, final entry. After 15 years, I can no longer continue this work. The ethical burden is too great. I've preserved 5 specimens for future study, though I pray no one ever continues this research. Thomas is dead. His son knows nothing of the ritual or its purpose, and I intend to keep it that way. The basement facility will be sealed. The surviving patients have been relocated to the state hospital under false diagnoses. May God forgive me for what I've done in the name of science and curiosity. But I fear the Moon Prince will not forget. During the last eclipse, all 7 remaining patients spoke in unison, though they were in different rooms. They said the threshold weakens with each crossing. Soon no return will be necessary. That was the last entry. My grandfather had sealed this room nearly 40 years ago and never spoken of it again. He'd lived another 30 years with this secret, treating patients by day, harboring these specimens beneath his home. But if he had truly ended the ritual, why had he kept the specimens? Why preserve the evidence? Unless he knew it wasn't over. I left everything as I'd found it, closed the metal door, exited the hidden corridor, and carefully moved the shelving unit back into place. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd seen. I needed air. I needed to think. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning split the sky as I walked to my car. That's when I noticed the date on my phone, September 28th. Something about that date nagged at me. I sat in my car, rain hammering the roof, and searched for upcoming astronomical events. Lunar eclipse. Tonight. The first total lunar eclipse visible from our town in 8 years. I drove to the local library. If my grandfather had been documenting this ritual for years, there might be historical records, newspaper articles, something to corroborate his accounts. The librarian, Mrs. Pendleton, who'd been there since I was a child, seemed unusually interested in my research into local eclipse folklore. Too interested. "Working on a paper?" she asked, hovering nearby as I scrolled through microfiche archives. "Just curious about local history," I replied. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your grandfather was quite the historian himself, always researching the old families. The old ways. I found what I was looking for in newspapers from the late 1960s through early 1980s. Small articles, easily overlooked. People gone missing around the time of lunar eclipses, usually written off as accidents, hikers lost in the woods, swimmers drowned in the lake. But the pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. And then I found something else. A photograph from 1972 showing the town council. My grandfather was there in the back row, and beside him, a face I recognized from family albums, Thomas Miller. But what caught my eye was the pin on Miller's lapel, a crescent moon with a human figure suspended in its curve. The same symbol from my grandfather's journals. As I was preparing to leave, Mrs. Pendleton approached again. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, her voice casual but her eyes intent. "Nothing special," I lied. She nodded slowly. "You know, your grandfather was a good man. He did what he had to do to protect this town." She leaned closer. "Some things are better left alone, especially on nights like tonight." I thanked her hastily and left, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. How much did she know? How many others in town were aware of what had been happening all these years? I drove aimlessly as the afternoon waned, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct told me to pack my bags and leave town, to forget what I'd discovered. But I couldn't. I needed to know more. The eclipse would begin at 10:24 p.m. Total darkness would fall at 11:47 p.m. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself driving toward Miller's Ridge, the old cave system, the place where, according to my grandfather's journals, people had been crossing over during lunar eclipses for generations. The trail to the caves was overgrown but still visible. A chain with a no trespassing sign blocked the path, but it was easy to step around. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the trees as I made my way up the ridge. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps. I reached the cave entrance as dusk was falling. It was smaller than I'd expected, just a dark opening in the rock face partially hidden by vegetation. No signs warned people away. Nothing indicated the horrors that had apparently occurred here. I checked my phone. 8:13 p.m. Hours still until the eclipse. I sat on a fallen log near the cave entrance, trying to decide my next move. Part of me wanted to hide nearby, to see if anyone came for the ritual tonight. Another part wanted to explore the cave itself before anyone arrived. The most sensible part, of course, screamed at me to leave immediately. I wasn't alone. I ducked behind a large tree, peering out carefully. A figure was moving up the path, flashlight beam bobbing in the growing darkness. As they drew closer, I recognized the silver hair and slight frame of Mrs. Pendleton from the library. She walked directly to the cave entrance, showing none of the hesitation you'd expect from an elderly woman alone in the woods at nightfall. She paused at the entrance, produced something small from her pocket, and placed it on a flat rock beside the opening. A small figurine or carving I couldn't see clearly. Then she entered the cave without looking back. I waited several minutes to ensure she was deep inside before approaching the cave mouth. The object she'd left was a small statue, carved from some dark stone. A human figure with elongated limbs and an oddly shaped head, just like the specimens in my grandfather's hidden laboratory. I switched on my own flashlight and stepped into the cave. The air inside was noticeably colder, with that same wrong smell I'd encountered in the basement facility, chemical yet organic, like formaldehyde mixed with something sweet and rotting. The passage descended gently at first, then more steeply. Basic cave formations lined the walls, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone, all glistening wet in my flashlight beam. Nothing unusual, Nothing to suggest ancient rituals or supernatural crossings, but the deeper I went, the more the character of the cave changed. The natural formations gave way to smoother surfaces, as if the rock had been deliberately worked. And then I began to notice carvings, simple at first, just lines and curves. Then more complex, lunar phases, human figures, that same crescent moon symbol from my grandfather's journals. The passage widened into a larger chamber. My flashlight couldn't illuminate the entire space, but I could make out a high ceiling and what appeared to be stone benches arranged in concentric circles around a central platform, an audience chamber, a place to witness something. I quickly switched off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall. Voices were approaching from a passage on the far side of the chamber. Flashlight beams swept across the space. "Everything is prepared." A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes, the threshold has been marked, the offering placed." Mrs. Pendleton's voice, unmistakable despite the echo. "And you're certain about the intruder?" The man again. "Hayes's grandson. I saw him at the library, asking questions, looking at the old newspapers." I froze. They knew I was investigating. "Is he like his grandfather? Will he understand the necessity?" A third voice now, another woman. "William never truly understood," Mrs. Pendleton replied. "He saw only the suffering, the transformations. He never grasped the gift being offered. Then his grandson is a liability." The man's voice had hardened. "Especially tonight of all nights. I needed to leave, now. But as I turned to retreat the way I'd come, my foot dislodged a small stone, sending it skittering across the floor. The flashlight beams immediately swung in my direction. "There!" shouted the man. "In the passage!" I ran, not bothering with stealth now, my own flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted back up the sloping passage. Behind me, I could hear my pursuers gaining. They knew these caves, knew exactly where to place their feet, even in near darkness. I burst out of the cave into the twilight forest, glancing at my phone as I ran. 9:45 p.m. The eclipse would begin soon. I needed to get to my car, to get away from this place, before whatever ritual they were planning commenced. I wasn't going to make it. They were too close, and I could hear others joining the pursuit, voices calling to each other from different directions, coordinating to cut me off. I needed somewhere to hide. There was a fallen tree ahead, its massive root system torn from the ground to create a natural shelter. I ducked behind it, trying to control my breathing, and switched off my flashlight. "He can't have gone far." The man's voice, much closer now. "Find him before moonrise." Flashlight beams swept the forest around me. I pressed myself flat against the dirt, hardly daring to breathe. "Why tonight?" Another voice, female, younger. "Why not just let him go and proceed as planned?" "Because the Moon Prince demands a guide for each crossing," Mrs. Pendleton replied, "and we've prepared no one else. If Hayes's grandson has seen the journals, he's already been marked, already connected. The prince will accept no other." A beam of light passed directly over my hiding place. I held my breath. "Nothing here," someone called, and the light moved on. I waited until the sounds of search had faded, before cautiously checking my phone again. 10:18 p.m. 6 minutes until the eclipse began. I peered out from my hiding place. Flashlight beams were still visible, but they'd moved further down the ridge. If I was careful, I might be able to circle around and reach my car. I crept from behind the fallen tree, staying low, moving as quietly as possible from one patch of shadow to the next. That's when I noticed the moon rising above the trees, larger than normal, its edge already darkening as Earth's shadow began to creep across its face. The eclipse was beginning. A strange sensation washed over me, a pressure in my ears, a heaviness in the air, as if a storm was gathering. But the sky above was clear except for the darkening moon. I needed to keep moving. My car wasn't far now. I could see the road through the trees ahead, but my legs suddenly felt like lead. Each step required enormous effort, as if I were walking against a powerful current. The very air seemed to thicken around me. "The threshold opens!" a voice called out from somewhere behind me, triumphant. Mrs. Pendleton's voice. "He feels it. The prince's call." I tried to run, but my body wouldn't respond properly. My movements became sluggish, uncoordinated. The moonlight filtering through the trees seemed to solidify into silver threads that wrapped around my limbs, pulling me back toward the ridge, back toward the cave. "No," I gasped, fighting against the invisible force. "This isn't real. This can't be happening." But even as I denied it, I knew it was real. Just as my grandfather's journals were real, just as the specimens in those tanks were real. The moon above was half covered now, a bizarre crescent of light being devoured by darkness. And as I watched, straining against the pull dragging me back up the hill, I saw something impossible. The darkness covering the moon wasn't just Earth's shadow. There was movement within it, shapes, figures reaching out from the blackness, elongated limbs stretching toward Earth, toward me. I screamed then, a primal sound of terror that tore from my throat. The sound seemed to break whatever force held me. I stumbled forward, regaining control of my limbs, and ran for the road. Behind me, voices raised in chant. Before me, my car, salvation, escape. I reached the road, fumbling for my keys with shaking hands. That's when the pain hit. Sudden, excruciating pain that dropped me to my knees. It felt as if every cell in my body was being pulled in different directions, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Through tear-blurred eyes, I looked up at the eclipse. 2/3 of the moon was dark now, and within that darkness the shapes were clearer, figures like those in my grandfather's tanks, but alive, moving, reaching. One seemed to look directly at me across the impossible void of space. I felt its awareness, its hunger, its patience. It had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Child of Haze." The voice wasn't spoken aloud, but filled my head, deep and resonant and ancient. "Your bloodline has been marked since your grandfather first witnessed our glory. You cannot escape what was set in motion before your birth." The pain intensified. I could feel my bones shifting beneath my skin. "No," I gasped. "Please, I don't want this." "Want is irrelevant. The crossing must be completed. For every soul that journeys to us, one must return. Balance must be maintained." Flashlight beams bobbed through the trees, Mrs. Pendleton and the others, approaching rapidly. "You fight what cannot be fought," the voice continued. "Your grandfather tried to end the cycle. He failed. The ritual continues because it must continue. The door once opened cannot be closed." I managed to pull myself up using my car door, the pain momentarily subsiding. The cultists, for that's what they were, had nearly reached me, and above the moon was almost completely darkened. I had seconds, not minutes, to escape. I threw myself into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. As I slammed the car into drive, Mrs. Pendleton emerged from the tree line directly in front of me, but she didn't look like the kindly librarian anymore. Her face was elongated, her arms too long, joints bent at unnatural angles. She was changing. They all were. I swerved around her, accelerating down the dark road. In my rearview mirror, I could see them watching me go. A dozen figures silhouetted against the eclipsed moon, their bodies contorted into impossible shapes, not stopping me, not pursuing, because they didn't need to. The pain returned as I drove, worse this time. My vision blurred. My hands on the steering wheel didn't look like my hands anymore. The fingers too long, the joints wrong. I couldn't go home, couldn't go to a hospital. There was only one person who might understand what was happening to me, who might know how to stop it. My grandfather's colleague, the only other doctor mentioned in the journals who had treated the returned patients, Dr. Eleanor Winters, retired now but still living on the outskirts of town. I barely made it to her door. The transformation was accelerating with each passing minute. My clothes no longer fit properly. My vision had changed, colors wrong, new spectrums visible, and the whispers in my head were constant now, voices speaking in languages I shouldn't understand, but somehow did. Dr. Winters opened the door wearing a bathrobe, her white hair disheveled from sleep. She took one look at me and her expression changed from annoyance to horror to resignation. "Another eclipse," she said softly. "Another crossing. Come inside quickly." She led me to her living room, moving with surprising agility for a woman in her 80s. "How far along is the transformation?" she asked clinically, examining my distorted hands without flinching. "I found my grandfather's journals," I managed to say through a mouth that felt wrong, teeth too numerous, tongue too long. "The specimens, the hidden lab." She nodded. "William was a good doctor. He wanted to help them, to reverse the process." She sighed. "We never found a way." "What's happening to me?" I asked, though I already knew. "The Necromancer's moon ritual works through exchange," she explained, retrieving a black medical bag from a cabinet. "Those who cross to the other side leave their human form behind. Those entities who wish to cross to our world need vessels. The exchange is never equal. More go than return." She extracted a syringe and vial from her bag. "But tonight is different. Tonight is the blood eclipse." "What does that mean?" The pain was becoming unbearable, my spine elongating, vertebrae popping as they realigned. Once every 42 years, the threshold becomes permeable in both directions, no ritual required. She prepared my arm for injection. Tonight they can cross without assistance. Tonight, the Moon Prince himself seeks entry. The medication burned through my veins, temporarily dulling the pain, slowing the transformation. "Your grandfather discovered that sedatives delay the process," Dr. Winters explained. "They can't stop it, but they buy time." "Time for what?" I asked, my speech slurring as the drugs took effect. "Time to make a choice." Her eyes were sad but determined. The only choice William could never make himself. From another cabinet, she retrieved an old leather-bound book, similar to my grandfather's journals but much older, the binding cracked and worn. "This belonged to Thomas Miller. Your grandfather confiscated it when Thomas died. He gave it to me for safekeeping." She placed it on the coffee table between us. "It contains the true history of Millbrook, of the pact made by the town's founders with the entities beyond the moon." I stared at the pages, the text swimming before my altered vision. Strange symbols and diagrams covered the yellowed paper. 4 families made the original pact in 1842, Dr. Winters continued. The Millers, the Thorns, the Pendletons, and the Hays. My family, my blood. The deal was simple. Prosperity and protection for the town in exchange for periodic tributes, human vessels to allow limited crossing. She turned another page, revealing illustrations of distorted human forms. "Your ancestors, along with the others, agreed to offer themselves during the lunar eclipses, to allow themselves to be changed. But something went wrong," I said, pieces falling into place. "The transformations became more extreme. The returned couldn't integrate back into society. Yes, she nodded. Around the 1960s, the entities began altering the vessels more dramatically. Your grandfather started treating them, documenting the changes, and when Samuel Thorne's transformation completed, when he fully became other, William realized the pact had been corrupted. He tried to stop the ritual, I said. He thought he had. Thomas Miller's death wasn't an accident. William killed him to end the cycle, destroyed the ritual site in the cave. She closed the book. But the pact can't be broken so easily. The door remained open. Others continued the ritual in secret. The sedative was already fading. I could feel the changes resuming, bones shifting, organs rearranging. Why didn't he tell anyone? Warn people? Dr. Winters laughed bitterly. Who would believe him? And half the town council were descendants of the original families. Complicit. She reached for my distorted hand. There's only one way to truly stop the cycle. William couldn't bring himself to do it, but I'm hoping you can. From the drawer of an end table, she produced a pistol. The bloodline must end, she said simply. All 4 bloodlines must be severed for the pact to dissolve. The Thorns died out naturally. I took care of the last Pendleton years ago. She gestured toward the window where the fully eclipsed moon hung blood-red in the sky. Only the Millers and Hayes remain. I stared at the gun, my transformed hand hovering over it. The whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. Come home, they urged. The Moon Prince awaits. I don't understand, I said, fighting through the pain. Why me? Why now? Because you're the last direct Hayes descendant with the original bloodline. Your grandfather had no siblings. Your father was an only child. You are the end of the line. Dr. Winters checked her watch. And this eclipse is special. The blood moon. It happens once every 42 years, and during this eclipse the barrier is thinnest. If I end it, what happens to those already transformed? To the town? The connection severs. Those fully transformed remain as they are, but no new transformations occur. The town, she shrugged, returns to being just a town. No more prosperity beyond reason. No more protection from disaster. Just normal human existence. Normal. The word seemed so strange now. Would I ever be normal again? Could this transformation be reversed? As if reading my thoughts, Dr. Winters shook her head. It's too late for you. The changes have progressed too far. Even if you survive, you'll become like the specimens in your grandfather's lab, neither fully human nor fully other, trapped between worlds. Her head snapped toward the window. They're coming. They can sense you. Sense the bloodline. She pushed the gun closer to me. You must decide now. Through the window I could see them, a dozen figures moving across Dr. Winters' lawn, not running, but gliding with unnatural smoothness. Their bodies twisted and elongated, some hunched, others impossibly tall. Mrs. Pendleton was at the front, her face now barely recognizable as human, and behind them all, a taller figure still, 7 feet at least, with limbs like bent saplings, and a head that was nothing but angles and elongated features. Robert Miller, the last of the Miller bloodline, the current keeper of the ritual. Hayes? The voice reverberated through the walls, not spoken aloud, but projected directly into my mind. The crossing is prepared. The Moon Prince awaits his vessel. Dr. Winters grabbed the gun and pressed it into my malforming hand. Choose now! They burst through the door. Mrs. Pendleton first, her body moving in segments like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Behind her, 3 others in similar states of transformation. Their eyes were wrong, too large, pupils elongated vertically like a cat's, but filled with a silvery light that matched the eclipsed moon. "The vessel is prepared," Mrs. Pendleton said, her voice layered with other voices speaking in unison. "The prince comes." Dr. Winters stepped between us, a syringe in her hand. "You'll have to go through me first, Margaret." Mrs. Pendleton tilted her head at an impossible angle. "Eleanor, still fighting what cannot be fought." Her elongated hand shot out faster than human reflexes should allow, grabbing Dr. Winters by the throat. "Your interference ends tonight." I raised the gun, aiming at Mrs. Pendleton's distorted head. But as my finger tightened on the trigger, a wave of pain doubled me over. I felt something shift inside my chest, ribs cracking, reforming, heart fluttering with an irregular rhythm. Sound. Gun dropping to floor. "Too late," Robert Miller said as he entered, his voice oddly musical despite coming from a mouth too wide, filled with teeth too numerous. "The transformation accelerates. Soon, you will be the perfect vessel." Mrs. Pendleton released Dr. Winters, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. The gun had skidded away, out of reach. "The Moon Prince honors your bloodline," Miller continued, towering over me. "Of all the families, the Hayes line produces the strongest vessels. Your grandfather would have been magnificent had he embraced the change." The pain was unbearable now. I could feel my consciousness slipping, being pushed aside as something else, something vast and cold and ancient, began to seep into the spaces between my thoughts. The Moon Prince, coming through. "Fight it," Dr. Winters wheezed from the floor. "Your grandfather fought it his entire life. You can too." I tried to focus on her voice, to anchor myself against the invasion. But the entity pressing into my mind was powerful, its will overwhelming. Images flashed through my consciousness, a vast dark plain beneath an enormous moon, towering twisted structures that defied Euclidean geometry, beings moving between stars without ships or protection, knowledge too profound for human minds to comprehend. "Yes," Miller whispered, his distorted face alight with fervor. "The prince shows you his domain, the place beyond the threshold. Soon you will be one with him, and he will walk this earth through you." From the corner of my eye, I saw Dr. Winters dragging herself towards something, not the gun, but her medical bag. The cultists were focused on me, paying her little attention. "The eclipse reaches totality," Mrs. Pendleton announced, her neck craned at an impossible angle to look through the window at the blood-red moon. "The veil is thinnest. Now is the moment of crossing." The cultists began to chant in a language I'd never heard before, yet somehow understood. Invocations to the Moon Prince, welcomes to their master, promises of flesh and bone and blood. My vision darkened around the edges. I could feel myself being pushed deeper into my own mind, becoming a passenger in my own body. The transformation was nearly complete. My limbs no longer responding to my commands, my voice no longer mine to use. "I welcome you, Prince of the Void Between Stars," Miller intoned, kneeling before me as my body rose of its own accord, joints moving in ways human anatomy should not allow. "Take this vessel and walk among us, as was promised." Dr. Winters had reached her bag and extracted not another syringe but a small glass vial. With her remaining strength, she hurled it at my feet where it shattered. White smoke billowed up, acrid, burning my transformed lungs and skin. The cultists shrieked, covering their faces. "Pure silver nitrate," Dr. Winters gasped. "Their one weakness. Go." My legs moved of their own accord, not controlled by the invading presence, but by some deep survival instinct. I stumbled through the writhing cultists, past Miller who clawed at his dissolving face, through the broken door and into the night. The blood moon hung directly overhead, a baleful red eye watching my escape. I ran blindly, my transformed body moving with unnatural speed despite the pain. The woods swallowed me, branches whipping past. Behind me I could hear pursuit resuming, the cultists recovering, giving chase. But they weren't just behind me. They were inside me too. The Moon Prince's presence, partially dislodged by the silver nitrate, was regrouping, pushing against my consciousness again. "You cannot escape," the voice resonated within my skull. "The crossing has begun. It cannot be undone." I found myself at the edge of Miller's Lake, a small body of water at the base of the ridge. The water reflected the blood moon perfectly, creating the illusion of two eclipses, one above, one below. And in that reflection, I saw myself for the first time since the transformation began. My face was elongated, eyes huge and silvery. My limbs had stretched, joints reversed. I was becoming like the specimens in my grandfather's lab, neither fully human nor fully other. But the transformation wasn't complete. Not yet. Some part of me still remained. The cultists were closing in. I could hear them moving through the woods behind me, their distorted bodies navigating the terrain with inhuman agility. Minutes, maybe seconds before they reached me. I looked again at my reflection in the blood-red water, at what I was becoming, at what would soon be walking the earth wearing my flesh, controlled by an entity from beyond the stars. Dr. Winter's words echoed in my mind. The bloodline must end. I stepped into the lake. The cool water rose around my transformed legs, oddly soothing against my burning skin. "What are you doing?" The prince's voice, alarmed now. "Return to shore. My vessel must not be damaged." Another step. Water to my waist now. "Stop!" The command slammed into my consciousness with overwhelming force. My body froze, muscles locked in place. "The vessel is mine now," the prince hissed within my mind. "Your will is secondary." The cultists burst from the tree line, Miller at the front, his face partially melted from the silver nitrate but reforming as I watched. Mrs. Pendleton and the others spread out along the shoreline, cutting off any escape. "Bring him to shore," Miller commanded. "The crossing must be completed on sacred ground." My body turned against my will, began wading back toward the shore. I fought with everything I had left, focusing on one single thought. My grandfather had resisted. For decades, he had fought against this corruption, had tried to break the cycle. I was his legacy, his blood. I would not surrender his final battle. With a supreme effort of will, I regained control of my right arm, just the arm, nothing else, but it was enough. I plunged it into the lake, fingers closing around a heavy stone on the bottom. "No!" The prince's presence thrashed within my mind, realizing my intent. My body convulsed as two wills fought for control. "Hurry!" Miller screamed from the shore. "He resists!" They were coming for me, wading into the lake, but they were too late. With the last of my strength, I raised the stone and brought it down against my own head. Pain exploded behind my eyes. Not enough. I struck again. Darkness crowded my vision. The prince's presence recoiled, weakening. One more blow would do it. "I end the bloodline," I whispered, through a mouth no longer fully human. "The pact is broken." As consciousness faded, I saw the cultists freeze in the water, their bodies suddenly rigid. Above, the blood moon began to lighten, the eclipse passing, and in my mind I felt the prince's presence tear away with a scream of rage and loss, ripped back across the threshold as the connection severed. My last thought before darkness claimed me was of my grandfather. I hoped he would be proud. I don't remember being found. Don't remember being pulled from the lake. Don't remember the ambulance or the emergency surgery. The doctors called it a miracle that I survived. Multiple skull fractures, severe contusions, nearly drowned. They had no explanation for my rapid healing, for the strange anomalies in my brain, scans that gradually normalized over the following weeks. They attributed my temporary amnesia and confused ramblings about the moon and transformations to traumatic brain injury. A convenient explanation. Dr. Winters visited once, her neck bruised but healing. She said nothing about that night, nothing about the ritual or the prince or the pact. She simply left a small package on my bedside table and squeezed my hand. Inside the package was my grandfather's wedding ring and a note. The Hayes bloodline continues, but the connection is broken. Live well. I left Millbrook as soon as I was discharged. Never returned. Never wanted to. But I keep track of the news from my hometown. The prosperity that had sustained it for generations has faded. The inexplicable good fortune that protected it from natural disasters and economic downturns has vanished. It's just a normal small town now, struggling like any other. Mrs. Pendleton was found drowned in Miller's Lake the morning after the eclipse. Robert Miller disappeared, his house empty, his car still in the driveway. 3 other residents vanished the same night. No one connected these events to me or to the eclipse. No one except Dr. Winters, who moved away 6 months later, leaving no forwarding address. Sometimes when the moon is full, I feel a phantom pain in my limbs, a memory of transformation. Sometimes I dream of that other place, the dark plain beneath the enormous moon, the twisted structures, the beings moving between stars. And sometimes I wake in the night certain that I'm not alone in my own head. The doctors found no physical explanation for my occasional seizures, for the silver flecks that sometimes appear in my eyes, for the way my joints can bend just slightly further than they should. The Hayes bloodline continues, as Dr. Winters said, but changed, marked. I had myself sterilized. My branch of the family tree ends with me. I've tracked the lunar eclipse schedule. The next blood moon, the next time the veil will be at its thinnest, won't occur for another 42 years, long after I'm gone. But sometimes, on ordinary nights when the moon is bright, I catch myself listening for whispers from beyond, watching for shapes moving within the shadows, waiting for the moon prince to find another way through, because I know now what my grandfather knew. Some doors once opened can never truly be closed. Some pacts, even when broken, leave scars across generations, and some entities are patient beyond human understanding. I keep my grandfather's journals locked in a safe deposit box, not to hide them, that would be futile, but to preserve them, as warning, as testimony, as proof that the Necromancer's moon ritual was real, that the transformations happened, that somewhere beyond our world, beyond the moon, beyond the stars, things wait and watch and occasionally reach through to touch our lives. I don't know if sharing this account puts you at risk. Perhaps simply knowing about the ritual creates some subtle connection. Perhaps the prince can sense your awareness now, can follow that gossamer thread back to you. Perhaps not. But if you ever find yourself looking up at a lunar eclipse, feeling an inexplicable pull, hearing whispers that seem to come from the darkness between stars rather than from any earthly source, run. And whatever you do, don't answer when the Moon Prince calls your name. If you enjoyed this horrifying story from the OBSCURALORE Vault, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who appreciate the darker side of reality. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or experiences, if you dare. Remember to turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into the unknown. The vault contains countless more terrible truths waiting to be revealed. Until next time, this is the OBSCURALORE Vault, where some secrets were never meant to be discovered, but we uncover them anyway.